6-month-old paralyzed baby lay still in his crib, just like every night. But when his puppy did the unthinkable, what happened next left everyone in awe. Was this a miracle? No parent is ever ready to hear the words, "There's nothing we can do." But that was exactly what Mason and Claire had been told about their 8-month-old daughter, Lily. She had been born full of life, her tiny legs kicking playfully, her hands grasping at everything in sight. But then, without warning, the movement stopped. No reason, no explanation, just stillness. Doctors ran every test imaginable, yet the results always led to the same heartbreaking answer. Lily would never move again. Their once lively home had turned into a place of quiet heartbreak, where hope faded with each passing day. But in the darkest of moments, hope has a strange way of finding its way back. Sometimes in the form of 4 legs and a wagging tail. That's when Atlas, their German Shepherd puppy, did something no one saw coming. And what happened next? It changed everything. Sometimes the ones who refuse to give up aren't the ones we expect. Atlas had been part of the family for only a few months, but in that short time, the German Shepherd puppy had become inseparable from Lily. He would lie beside her crib, his amber eyes watching every slow rise and fall of her chest. Unlike everyone else, Atlas never looked at Lily with pity. He didn't see a broken child. He saw his best friend, the little human he was meant to protect. That night, as the house settled into its usual silence, something shifted. Claire sat on the couch, absent-mindedly twisting the hem of Lily's baby blanket between her fingers. Across the room, Mason stared at the floor, lost in thoughts that never seemed to lead anywhere. They had prayed, researched, begged for miracles, but nothing had changed. Their daughter still lay motionless, her body unresponsive to the world around her. And yet, Atlas sensed something no one else did. At first, it was just the twitch of an ear, the slight lift of his head. Then suddenly he was on his feet, his body tensed, eyes locked on the nursery door. He let out a low whimper, just enough to make Claire's head snap up. Mason looked at her, confused. What was that? Claire's heart pounded as she listened. A few seconds of silence, then another whimper, then the soft sound of paws against the hardwood floor as Atlas paced in small, frantic circles. Something was wrong. Without another word, they both rushed to the nursery. What they saw stopped them cold. Atlas stood on his hind legs, paws pressed against Lily's crib. His tail was still, his body tense, not in fear, but in anticipation. His gaze never left Lily, and then her fingers twitched. It was barely a movement, just the slightest shift, but it was real. Claire gasped, clutching Mason's arm. And Atlas? He just wagged his tail, like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Miracles don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they begin with the smallest movement, barely noticeable, yet powerful enough to change everything. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't imagining it. Lily's tiny fingers had twitched, just once, just for a second. But after months of stillness, even the smallest movement felt like a thunderclap. Mason stood frozen beside her, his grip tightening around the crib's railing. "Did you see that?" His voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. Claire nodded, her hands trembling. I don't know how, but she moved." Atlas let out another soft whimper, pressing his snout against the crib's bars. His ears twitched. His tail gave a slow, deliberate wag. He wasn't confused. He wasn't surprised. It was as if he had known all along that this moment was coming. And then, just as Claire dared to reach forward, it It happened again. Lily's tiny hand flexed, her fingers curling and uncurling. Weak but determined. A choked sob escaped Claire's lips as she dropped to her knees beside the crib, barely able to breathe. Mason's eyes shone with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Hope. Atlas whined, his excitement growing, his eyes locked onto Lily. He lifted his front paws again, nudging the crib gently, encouragingly. And then, for the first time in months, Lily responded. A soft, barely audible sound left her lips. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a whimper, it was just a tiny, sleepy noise. But to Claire, it might as well have been a roar. Her baby was waking up. Mason let out a shaky laugh, one hand running through his hair. This isn't possible. Claire turned to him, tears streaming down her face. But it's happening. And as they watched, Lily's fingers reached, slowly, shakily, toward Atlas. She wasn't just moving, she was reaching. No one had dared to dream of this moment, but now it was unfolding right before their eyes. Lily's tiny fingers stretched toward Atlas, shaking, uncertain, but moving, really moving. Claire let out a gasp so sharp it felt like it stole the breath from her lungs. Mason, usually the one who stayed steady in moments of crisis, gripped the crib's railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. For months they had been told this was impossible, that their daughter would never regain movement. That hope was a cruel illusion. Yet here she was, defying everything. Atlas didn't move, didn't even flinch. He stayed completely still, his amber eyes locked onto Lily, as if he knew this was her moment. His ears twitched. His tail gave a slow, steady wag. Not frantic, not impatient. Just knowing. And then Lily's hand made contact. It was the lightest touch, barely more than a brush of her fingertips against Atlas's fur. But it was enough. Enough for Claire to let out a sob. For Mason to release the breath he hadn't realized he was holding, for the weight of despair that had suffocated their home for months to finally lift. Lily let out a soft coo, her eyelids fluttering, her face scrunching as if trying to process what was happening. Atlas, ever so gently, lowered his head into her tiny palm. He wasn't just there, he was meeting her halfway. Mason ran a hand over his face, his voice thick with emotion. I don't understand. Claire shook her head, wiping away her tears. I don't care. She's moving. She's fighting. And as they watched, something else happened. Beneath the blanket, almost imperceptibly, Lily's legs twitched. Claire let out a strangled cry, covering her mouth with both hands. Mason's breath came in short, sharp bursts. Atlas let out the softest, most triumphant little whine, like he had known all along that this was only the beginning. Sometimes the moment that changes everything starts with something so small, so fragile, that you almost miss it. Claire didn't dare blink. She couldn't. If she did, she might lose this moment forever. Lily's legs had moved. Not just once, not just a tiny reflex, a real, undeniable movement. Mason dropped to his knees beside her, his breath ragged. His hands hovered over Lily, as if he was afraid to touch her, afraid that whatever miracle was happening might slip away the second he reached out. Did you see that? He whispered. Claire nodded, unable to form words. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless. For months she had begged for a sign, just one sign, that their baby girl wasn't lost. And now she was waking up. Atlas stood motionless, his gaze never leaving Lily. He let out a low, soft whine, almost as if urging her on. His tail wagged, slow and steady, as if he understood something no one else did. And then Lily's legs twitched again. Stronger this time, more deliberate. Claire let out a shaky sob, reaching for her daughter's tiny foot beneath the blanket. It was warm, soft, alive. She gently ran her fingers over it, waiting, hoping, pleading. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "You can do this." And then, it happened. Lily's foot kicked. Mason let out something between a laugh and a cry, grabbing Claire's arm. "Oh my God," he choked out. "She's really—" Before he could finish, Lily did it again. A tiny, determined kick. Claire's body shook as she pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. This was real. This was happening. Atlas barked, a sharp, joyful sound, as if celebrating what they all felt but couldn't yet put into words. Hope wasn't just a distant dream anymore. It was here. It was alive. And it had 4 legs and a wagging tail. Some moments redefine everything you thought you knew about the world. This was one of them. Mason and Claire had spent months trapped in a nightmare, watching their daughter exist but not live. And now, in the span of mere moments, everything had changed. Lily's tiny foot had kicked once, then again. And now, as if something deep within her had finally awakened, her legs shifted beneath the blanket. Not just a twitch, but movement. Real, undeniable movement. Claire let out a choked sob, pressing her fingers against her lips, her body trembling from the sheer weight of what she was witnessing. "Mason," she gasped, her voice breaking. She's moving." Mason couldn't take his eyes off their daughter. His hands shook as he reached out, barely able to believe what was happening. For months they had lived in stillness. Now that stillness had been shattered. Atlas, as if sensing the magnitude of the moment, let out a joyful bark. He stood on his hind legs again, paws pressed against the crib, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. His eyes never left Lily, watching her with an expression of pure, unshakable devotion. And then Lily made a sound, a tiny soft coo, weak but full of life. Mason's breath caught as he reached for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "I have to record this," he said, voice raw with emotion. "No one is going to believe." But before he could press record, Lily did something neither of them could have ever imagined. Her eyelids fluttered open. Big, deep brown eyes blinked up at them, unfocused at first. And then she turned her gaze toward Atlas. Her tiny fingers reached again, this time with more purpose, stretching toward the dog who had never once left her side. Atlas didn't hesitate. He leaned in, nuzzling her outstretched hand, and let out the softest, happiest whimper. And in that moment, Claire knew. Lily wasn't just waking up. She was coming back. Not all heroes wear capes. Some have fur, 4 legs, and a heart too big for their body. Atlas had never left Lily's side. Not when she lay motionless, not when the doctors gave up, not when her parents lost hope. And now, as her tiny fingers curled into his fur, as her big brown eyes blinked up at him, it was clear. He had been waiting for this moment all along. Claire let out a shaky breath, brushing away the endless stream of tears on her cheeks. Mason, usually the pillar of strength, was gripping the crib's edge like he needed something to hold him to reality. This wasn't just progress. This was a miracle. Lily stirred again, her body still weak, still recovering, but alive in a way she hadn't been in months. Her tiny hand gripped Atlas's fur with more strength than before, her fingers tightening as if she knew this dog had saved her. Atlas let out a soft, joyful whimper, his tail wagging furiously now. He licked Lily's little hand, and instead of flinching like before, she giggled. Claire gasped, her heart swelling with emotions she couldn't name. That sound, light, delicate, so purely Lily, was something she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. Mason let out a disbelieving laugh, his voice thick with emotion. "She's laughing," he whispered. "She's really laughing." And just like that, the weight that had crushed them for so long finally lifted. The days that followed were a whirlwind of hope and disbelief. Each morning, Lily moved a little more, her fingers gripping, her legs kicking, her eyes brighter than they had been in months. Doctors were stunned, calling it an unexplainable recovery. But Claire and Mason knew the truth. It wasn't medicine, it wasn't science, it was love. Love that had never wavered, love that had come in the form of an unshakable, loyal protector. Atlas had believed in Lily when no one else dared to, and in the end, that belief had been enough. Life has a way of teaching us that miracles don't always come in grand, earth-shattering moments. Sometimes they arrive quietly through unwavering love, patience, and the refusal to give up. Lily's story isn't just about a child defying the odds. It's about the unseen power of connection, the way love, even from the most unexpected places, can heal wounds no medicine can touch. In life, we all face moments of hopelessness, times when we feel trapped in darkness. But hope is not lost as long as we keep believing. Atlas never gave up on Lily, just as we must never give up on those we love. Whether it's supporting a struggling friend, caring for a family member, or simply being present, our love can be the light that guides someone back from despair. Sometimes the smallest acts of love create the greatest miracles. And in the end, isn't love what truly makes life worth living?